Every human relationship, whether fleeting or lifelong, acts as a mirror reflecting aspects of our inner world we often fail to see. The emotions we experience toward others, love, admiration, jealousy, anger, or hate, are not random feelings that arise out of nowhere. They are messages from the deeper layers of the psyche, revealing what is hidden beneath the surface of consciousness. The people we meet are not accidents, they are reflections, projections, and teachers disguised as ordinary interactions. When we look closely enough, we discover that every emotion directed outward carries a truth about who we are within. The moment you feel an intense emotional reaction towards someone, whether positive or negative, you are standing before a mirror. What you perceive in others is not only about them, it is also about what resonates or conflicts with something in you. If you feel admiration, you may be seeing a potential within yourself that is waiting to be expressed. If you feel irritation or jealousy, you may be encountering a part of yourself that you've disowned, denied, or repressed. The outer experience becomes a psychological reflection of the inner condition. Jealousy, for example, does not arise because another person has something we truly cannot have. It arises because they embody something we desire but have not yet allowed ourselves to claim. When you feel jealousy towards someone's confidence, success, or peace, you are witnessing a reflection of your own unawakened power. The discomfort of jealousy is the psyche's way of pointing toward areas of personal growth. But instead of embracing that discomfort as a guide, the ego often turns it outward, transforming self-awareness into judgment. We project onto others what we cannot yet face in ourselves. This mechanism of projection is not an act of malice. It is a defense. The mind seeks to avoid pain by externalizing it. We judge others for being arrogant, selfish, or weak because these are qualities we fear in ourselves. We create distance between us and them so we do not have to confront our own shadows. But the truth is that the traits we despise most in others often represent the disowned fragments of our own identity. Every criticism reveals an unintegrated piece of our psyche waiting to be seen. Emotions are not moral judgments, they are information. Each one carries a symbolic message about the relationship between our conscious self and our unconscious truth. Anger can reveal boundaries we have ignored. Envy can highlight suppressed desires. Fear can point to unhealed wounds. Hatred can expose unresolved pain. When we learn to read emotions as messages rather than mistakes, they transform from chaotic storms into instruments of self-knowledge. The outer world becomes a stage upon which our inner dramas unfold, and every person becomes a mirror reflecting back the next step of our growth. The danger lies in misinterpreting these reflections as reality. When we believe that others are the cause of our emotions, we become trapped in blame and resentment. We think, they made me angry, or they make me feel small, forgetting that no one can truly make us feel anything. Others can only trigger what already exists within us. The trigger is not the problem, it is the invitation. What matters is how we respond once the mirror is shown. Do we shatter it to avoid seeing ourselves, or do we gaze into it with courage and curiosity? To look into the mirror of emotion is to practice radical self-honesty. It means asking, what part of me is reacting right now? What is this emotion trying to reveal? Such questions shift the focus from judgment to awareness. Instead of saying, that person is arrogant, we begin to ask, why does their confidence disturb me? Instead of thinking, They are so selfish. We might wonder, have I been neglecting my own needs? This form of inquiry dismantles the illusion of separation. It allows us to see others not as threats, but as reflections guiding us toward inner integration. Emotional projection is not inherently negative. It is how we begin to recognize the unconscious. Without mirrors, we would remain blind to much of who we are. Every relationship, every moment of discomfort becomes a psychological revelation. The key is not to suppress our projections, but to withdraw them consciously. To say, this emotion belongs to me, is to reclaim our power. By owning our projections, we retrieve the lost fragments of our authenticity. The more we do this, the clearer our perception becomes, and the less we are ruled by reactive emotions. When we stop fighting our emotional reflections, we begin to understand that the people who challenge us most are often the ones offering us the greatest insight. The rival who provokes our jealousy, the friend who awakens our irritation, the stranger who triggers our judgment, all are mirrors showing us the contours of our shadow and the potential of our light. They reveal not only our wounds, but also our possibilities. What we admire in others is often the future version of ourselves that is waiting to emerge. The mirror of emotion is not meant to flatter, it is meant to awaken. It reveals the truth that everything we experience externally is part of a larger inner dialogue. Every feeling is a reflection of the relationship we have with ourselves. The world does not simply happen to us, it happens through us. The people we meet, the emotions they stir, the reactions they trigger, all serve as messages from the deeper layers of consciousness, inviting us to evolve beyond judgment into understanding, beyond projection into self-awareness, beyond resistance into integration. Envy is one of the most hidden and misunderstood emotions in the human psyche. It rarely introduces itself honestly. Instead, it disguises itself as quiet disapproval, subtle judgment, or even moral superiority. Few people are willing to admit, I feel envy, because it threatens the ego's image of virtue. Yet beneath many of our criticisms, our silent resentments, and our sudden dislikes lies the shadow of envy, the part of us that cannot bear to see someone else living the life we secretly wish we had the courage to claim. Envy is not inherently evil. It is a messenger from the unconscious, revealing where we have abandoned our own potential. When we witness someone embodying confidence, success, creativity, beauty, or freedom, envy arises not because they have something we truly cannot attain, but because they mirror something we have not yet expressed. The feeling stings because it exposes the gap between who we are and who we could become. In that sense, envy is not a judgment against others, it is a reflection of our own unlived life. Most people, however, are not taught to see envy this way. From an early age, we learn to conceal it behind politeness or disguise it beneath criticism. We label the envied person as lucky, undeserving, or arrogant to protect our sense of self. The ego, threatened by comparison, invents stories to preserve its illusion of superiority. Instead of confronting the discomfort of self-awareness, it projects blame outward. This is how envy transforms into hostility. What began as a quiet ache of longing becomes an attack on the very person who awakened that longing. When we envy someone, we are unconsciously recognizing a fragment of our own soul that we have denied. The artist we mock for being too dramatic reflects our suppressed creativity. The confident speaker we dismiss as showing off reflects our buried desire for self expression. The person who dares to live freely reflects our own fear of freedom. Every time envy arises, it signals that a part of us has been exiled into the shadow. The more we deny this part, the stronger our envy becomes, and the more distorted our perception of others grows. Envy often hides beneath moral language. We may claim that someone doesn't deserve their success, or that fame changes people. But beneath these rationalizations lies a wound, the pain of witnessing another person manifest what we have not allowed ourselves to pursue. The mind covers this wound with moral reasoning because it is easier to condemn than to confront the truth that we feel small. Yet, the feeling of smallness is not a curse, it is an invitation to grow. Envy shows us where we have settled for less than our potential and where we must reclaim our own authority to create. The shadow of envy becomes destructive when it is denied. What we refuse to face, we project. A person unaware of their envy becomes unconsciously competitive, critical, or cold. They may sabotage relationships, withdraw affection, or celebrate the failures of others while pretending it is harmless. The unconscious seeks balance, and when envy is repressed, it seeks release through passive aggression or judgment. The more we deny envy, the more it shapes our actions without our awareness. However, when envy is acknowledged consciously, it transforms. The moment we can say, I feel envy and it hurts because I want what they have, the emotion loses its poison and reveals its power. It becomes a map pointing toward the life we desire. Envy, when understood, becomes a guide to our unlived ambitions. It tells us where we are disconnected from our own creative energy. It reveals what qualities or achievements we admire but have not yet embodied. By listening to envy rather than suppressing it, we begin to reclaim the parts of ourselves that we projected onto others. There is a sacred truth hidden inside every envious impulse. What we envy, we are capable of becoming. We cannot recognize greatness, beauty, or talent in others unless that potential exists somewhere within us. The pain of envy is the pain of witnessing a mirror of our own possibility. It asks, why not you? The discomfort is not punishment, it is awakening. To transform envy, we must move from competition to inspiration, from comparison to curiosity. Instead of asking, why do they have that and not me? We ask, what does this feeling reveal about what I truly want? Society often magnifies envy through constant comparison. Social media, competition, and cultural ideals create an environment where everyone's success feels like a personal loss. This collective envy keeps individuals trapped in resentment instead of empowerment. But envy only thrives where self-awareness is absent. The more grounded we are in our individuality, the less we need to compare. When we are connected to our purpose, another's light does not diminish ours. It reminds us of what is possible. To work with envy consciously, we must learn to see it as feedback rather than failure. When we feel that familiar ache of comparison, we pause and ask, what value or ability is this person expressing that I've neglected within myself? The answer often points directly to our next stage of growth. Envy then becomes a form of emotional intelligence, a signal from the psyche urging us to expand. Instead of judging the feeling, we integrate it. Instead of suppressing it, we act on the wisdom it carries. The shadow of envy reveals that every negative emotion conceals a creative force. The same energy that fuels jealousy can, when transformed, become motivation, vision, and purpose. But this transformation requires humility the willingness to see that the problem is not out there, but within. It requires courage to face the pain of comparison and to turn it into self-discovery. Envy, when illuminated, ceases to be about others at all. It becomes a dialogue between the self we are and the self we are meant to become. When we stop running from envy, it loses its sting and begins to serve its true purpose, to awaken dormant potential. The shadow does not disappear through denial. It becomes light through understanding. Envy is not proof of weakness, but evidence of a deeper hunger for authenticity, expression, and fulfillment. Hidden within its shadow is the creative energy waiting to rise the moment we stop pretending we are unaffected by the brilliance of others. Comparison is one of the most subtle forms of self-betrayal. It appears harmless at first. A quick glance at someone else's success, beauty, or confidence. But beneath that glance lies a quiet erosion of self-worth. The moment we begin to measure ourselves against another, we lose touch with our own rhythm. Comparison distorts perception, convincing us that life is a race rather than a path of individual unfolding. It wounds the spirit because it makes us forget who we are while trying to become a reflection of someone else. This wound begins early. As children, we are taught to look outward for validation. Parents, teachers, and peers often praise us in relation to others. You're smarter than your friend, or why can't you be more like them? From those words, we internalize the belief that our value depends on how we measure up. The mind learns to rank, to evaluate, to compete. Who am I? We ask. Am I better? Or am I enough? The self becomes fragmented, living not in authenticity, but in reaction to others. Comparison is the shadow side of admiration. What begins as inspiration can quickly turn to self-criticism when we forget that someone else's success does not diminish our own. We look at people who appear more accomplished, more attractive, more loved, and we feel small. But the feeling of smallness does not come from reality, it comes from illusion. The illusion that life is linear, that everyone should arrive at the same destination at the same time, that value is measured by visibility. The truth is, every soul unfolds in its own divine timing. To compare journeys is to ignore the complexity of destiny. The wound of comparison thrives in environments that reward conformity. Society often praises sameness while quietly punishing individuality. The result is that people begin to imitate instead of create, when to mimic instead of express. When we compare, we step out of our own story and attempt to live someone else's script. The moment we do, we disconnect from intuition. The voice of comparison grows louder while the voice of inner wisdom grows faint. The self becomes a stranger, wandering through borrowed identities, wondering why fulfillment feels so distant. At the heart of comparison lies a deep fear of inadequacy. The ego constantly searches for external proof that we are enough, more talented, more loved, more worthy. But because there will always be someone who seems to have more, the ego remains trapped in endless striving. It becomes addicted to measuring progress through others' achievements, unable to recognize its own unique worth. This is why comparison feels painful. It keeps us chasing validation that can never satisfy the soul. The comparison wound also distorts relationships. It breeds subtle resentment and quiet rivalry, even among friends and loved ones. Instead of celebrating another's light, we feel diminished by it. We perceive others as competitors in a game that does not actually exist. The heart, which naturally desires connection, becomes guarded. We praise others with our words, but compete with them in our thoughts. Love turns conditional, admiration becomes envy, and collaboration turns into silent competition. The wound divides where it should unite. Healing begins with awareness. The first step is to recognize that comparison is not about others at all. It is about our relationship with ourselves. When we feel triggered by someone's success or beauty, it reveals a part of us that feels unseen or unexpressed. The discomfort is not proof of inferiority. It is a signal pointing toward self-neglect. Instead of asking, why do they have what I don't? We ask, what within me longs for expression but has been denied? The answer to that question reveals the hidden potential waiting beneath the wound. The wound of comparison deepens because we mistake visibility for worth. We assume that those who are seen, celebrated, or admired have more value than those who live quietly. But the truest forms of greatness are often invisible, acts of integrity, moments of compassion, silent endurance. The world may not applaud these things, yet they hold immense spiritual weight. When we measure our worth through external markers, we lose sight of the inner virtues that define real fulfillment. Comparison also thrives on illusion. We rarely compare ourselves to reality. We compare ourselves to the surface of what we see. Social media, status, and appearances present fragments of truth, never the whole picture. We envy people's highlights while forgetting their unseen struggles. We compare our behind the scenes to someone else's edited performance. This distorted lens ensures that we always come up short because we are comparing our truth to another person's illusion. The pain that follows is not a reflection of our inadequacy, but of our misunderstanding. To heal the wound of comparison, we must return to presence. Presence reminds us that there is no one to compete with because no one shares our exact path, pain, or purpose. The moment we become deeply present, comparison dissolves. There is only the unfolding of our own life, step by step, without the noise of judgment. Presence reconnects us with gratitude, with the quiet realization that we already have enough, that we already are enough. In gratitude, envy cannot survive. Comparison loses its grip when we cultivate authenticity. The more we express who we truly are, the less power external validation holds over us. Authenticity does not seek approval, it seeks alignment. It allows us to celebrate others without diminishing ourselves because we understand that everyone's expression serves a different function in the larger design of existence. Just as no two stars compete for brightness in the sky, no two souls compete for purpose. Each shines according to its own essence. The wound of comparison teaches that peace is not found in superiority or success, but in self-acceptance. When we finally stop measuring, we begin to live. We realize that the purpose of life is not to be the best version compared to others, but to be the truest version of ourselves. Comparison fades when we recognize that the only meaningful standard is authenticity. Every time we honor our own timing, our own growth, our own truth, the wound begins to close, and the inner voice that once said, "I am not enough," grows quieter, replaced by a deeper knowing that we were never meant to be anyone else. Empathy is one of the most profound expressions of human consciousness, yet it is also one of the most misunderstood. It is often mistaken for agreement, indulgence, or emotional weakness. Many people believe that to be empathetic means to absorb the pain of others or to lose oneself in their suffering. But genuine empathy is not about dissolving boundaries. It is about understanding them. It is not submission, it is awareness. The paradox of empathy lies in its dual nature. To truly understand another, one must remain deeply connected to oneself. Empathy begins not with the other, but with self-awareness. Without an understanding of our own emotions, motives, and wounds, what we call empathy often becomes projection. We imagine what others feel based on our own pain rather than their truth. In doing so, we replace understanding with assumption. Real empathy requires a certain detachment, a conscious ability to feel without merging, to understand without absorbing. It is the balance between compassion and clarity, heart and discernment. The paradox becomes visible when we realize that too much empathy without boundaries leads to emotional exhaustion. When we constantly tune into others' pain, we begin to drown in it. The empathetic individual who does not know how to regulate their sensitivity becomes a sponge for the world's suffering. This overextension creates resentment, fatigue, and even guilt for not being able to help enough. The very quality that connects them to humanity becomes the source of their disconnection from themselves. Empathy without grounding transforms love into burden. True empathy requires strength, not fragility. It demands that we stand firmly in our center so that we can meet others from a place of stability. The capacity to witness another's suffering without losing our balance is not indifference, it is mastery. Empathy, in its highest form, does not mean feeling for others, but feeling with them, while remaining conscious that their pain is not ours to carry. It is an act of awareness, not emotional contagion. At the same time, the absence of empathy leads to dehumanization. A person who refuses to see the inner reality of others becomes trapped in cold rationality, unable to connect or trust. The lack of empathy hardens the psyche, building invisible walls between individuals and turning life into a series of roles rather than relationships. Too little empathy leads to isolation, too much empathy leads to enmeshment. The paradox is that both extremes, detachment and over-identification, block true connection. Empathy's power lies in its capacity to reveal the shared human condition. When we truly see another person's emotions, we are reminded that we too are capable of the same. To understand hatred, we must admit the potential for hatred within ourselves. To understand fear, we must recognize our own vulnerability. This reflection breaks the illusion of separation. It reminds us that no emotion is foreign to the human heart. The line between me and you becomes more fluid, not in a way that erases individuality, but in a way that deepens compassion. The greatest challenge of empathy is discernment. Not every emotion we perceive requires our intervention. Sometimes the most compassionate act is not to fix, but to witness. When we rush to rescue others from their pain, we may be relieving our own discomfort rather than supporting their growth. True empathy allows space for the other person's journey, trusting that their pain holds its own wisdom. It recognizes that suffering can be a teacher, not just a wound to be bandaged. Empathy is also deeply intertwined with shadow work. To be empathetic toward others, we must first face the parts of ourselves we have rejected. If we have not accepted our own anger, we will struggle to understand the anger of others. If we deny our envy, our fear, or our weakness, we will unconsciously judge those emotions in others instead of empathizing with them. Self-empathy, the willingness to see our own imperfections with compassion, is the foundation of empathy for others. The more we integrate our shadows, the more we can hold space for the shadows of the world. The paradox deepens because empathy is both a bridge and a mirror. It connects us to others, yet it constantly reflects us back to ourselves. Every time we empathize, we engage in an act of inner recognition. What we understand in another person exists somewhere within us, even if it is buried. This is why empathy can be uncomfortable. It exposes the parts of our humanity that we would rather not face. The suffering of another awakens our own unresolved emotions, forcing us to confront the universality of pain. Empathy also reveals the delicate boundary between compassion and self-sacrifice. Many people mistake self-abandonment for love. They give endlessly, listen endlessly, and absorb endlessly, believing that to suffer with someone is to love them. But love without self-awareness becomes martyrdom. Empathy does not ask us to bleed, it asks us to understand. It invites us to meet others where they are, while remaining anchored in who we are. Only from that grounded place can empathy become transformative instead of draining. In its mature form, empathy becomes a form of wisdom. It no longer reacts emotionally to every expression of suffering, but perceives the deeper meaning behind it. It sees that each person's struggle reflects their unique path of growth. This level of empathy does not collapse under the weight of the world's pain, because it understands that pain is not the enemy, it is the catalyst. Instead of drowning in emotion, this form of empathy learns to channel it into insight, creativity, and connection. The paradox of empathy teaches that understanding others requires boundaries and protecting ourselves requires openness. It teaches that the heart must be both soft and strong, receptive yet discerning. It shows that true compassion is not about losing ourselves in another's experience, but expanding our awareness to include theirs without erasing our own. Empathy, when integrated, becomes not an emotional reaction, but a state of consciousness that bridges the gap between self and other, darkness and light. Understanding and transformation, human beings are constantly caught in a war within themselves, a war between what they label as good and bad, positive and negative, light and dark. From the moment we begin to feel, we are taught to divide our inner world. Joy, gratitude, and love are welcomed and celebrated, while anger, jealousy, and grief are shamed, suppressed, or feared. This separation creates emotional duality, a condition in which we live at odds with our own nature, rejecting half of what makes us human. To transcend emotional duality is not to erase emotion, but to integrate it, to see every feeling as a message from the psyche, rather than a threat to it. The roots of emotional duality lie in moral conditioning. Society teaches us to view emotions through the lens of approval. Certain feelings are labeled good because they align with social harmony, while others are labeled bad because they disturb it. A child who cries is told to be strong. A person who feels anger is called uncontrolled. Over time, we internalize these judgments and begin to censor our emotions before they even surface. We create an inner hierarchy of feelings, believing that peace can only exist if we banish the uncomfortable ones. But repression does not bring peace. It breeds distortion. What we refuse to feel does not disappear. It descends into the unconscious and governs our behavior from the shadows. Emotional duality fragments the self. When we reject emotions like rage, envy, or sadness, we exile vital parts of our psyche. These rejected fragments form what psychology calls the shadow, the hidden reservoir of all we deny about ourselves. The shadow holds both the traits we fear and the strengths we have suppressed. Anger can become courage when understood. Envy can become motivation. Grief can become depth. But when we label them as wrong, we strip them of their transformative potential. Integration begins when we stop asking, how do I get rid of this feeling? And start asking, what is this feeling trying to teach me? The path to transcendence begins with awareness. Every emotion, no matter how uncomfortable, carries information about the state of our inner world. Fear reveals where we seek safety. Anger shows where our boundaries have been crossed. Jealousy points to desires left unexplored. Sadness highlights what we value and have lost. When we approach emotions with curiosity instead of condemnation, they become allies in self-discovery. Each one serves a function, guiding us toward greater wholeness. Emotional intelligence is not the suppression of negative emotions, but the understanding of their purpose. Transcending emotional duality requires shifting from judgment to observation. Instead of labeling emotions as good or bad, we witness them as energy moving through us. This detachment does not mean disconnection. It means freedom. When you observe emotion without identifying with it, you allow it to express its message and then dissolve. The moment we say, I am angry, we fuse with the emotion. The moment we say, anger is present, we create space for awareness. This subtle shift transforms reaction into reflection. The goal is not to feel only pleasant emotions, but to experience all emotions consciously. The struggle with emotional duality also arises from the illusion of permanence. We tend to treat emotions as absolute states rather than temporary experiences. Joy is not eternal, and neither is sorrow. Each emotion, like a wave, rises, peaks, and subsides. When we resist this natural rhythm, clinging to happiness or fleeing from pain, we create suffering. Emotional transcendence comes from embracing impermanence, recognizing that every emotion, no matter how intense, is passing through, not defining who we are. The self is not the storm, but the sky through which emotions move. Many spiritual traditions teach detachment as a way to transcend emotions, but true transcendence does not mean avoidance. It means intimacy without attachment. To be intimate with emotion is to feel it fully without drowning in it. It is the ability to sit with anger without aggression, to hold grief without despair, to experience joy without clinging to it. Detachment in this sense is not coldness, but clarity. It allows us to engage with emotion as conscious participants rather than unconscious victims. Emotional duality also manifests in how we treat others. We divide people into those who make us feel good and those who make us feel bad. We seek comfort and avoid confrontation, believing that harmony means the absence of discomfort. But authentic relationships require emotional honesty, not constant positivity. To transcend duality in connection, we must be willing to hold space for both love and conflict, admiration and disappointment. Real empathy arises when we can witness the full range of emotion in another without judgment, because we have learned to do the same within ourselves. The integration of opposites is the essence of emotional maturity. Every emotion contains its counterpart within it. Joy holds the seed of sorrow. Love holds the risk of pain. Anger carries the energy of protection. When we recognize this interdependence, we stop trying to divide life into halves and begin to see its totality. This is why emotional transcendence is not about control, but acceptance. It is not about silencing one emotion to amplify another, but about realizing that light and shadow are inseparable forces within the same consciousness. Transcending emotional duality also requires compassion for the parts of ourselves that are still learning. Many people shame themselves for feeling negative emotions, believing that spiritual or emotional growth means constant positivity. But growth is not linear, it is cyclical. We revisit the same emotions at deeper levels each time, not because we are failing, but because we are integrating more of our humanity. Compassion means allowing every part of ourselves, angry, scared, loving, hopeful, to coexist without resistance. When we stop dividing our emotions into categories of worthiness, we reclaim immense psychic energy. Repression drains vitality, while acceptance restores it. To feel fully is to live fully. Emotional transcendence does not lead us away from the human experience. It anchors us deeper within it, but with consciousness. Each emotion becomes a messenger, not a master. Each feeling, whether painful or pleasant, becomes a doorway into self-awareness. The dualistic mind seeks control, but the awakened heart seeks understanding. The moment we cease to battle our emotions, we begin to see them as waves of the same ocean. Different expressions of one life energy moving through form. What we once called darkness reveals its wisdom, and what we once called light becomes more humble. Transcendence emerges not through escape, but through integration. When we allow the full spectrum of emotion to coexist within us without judgment, resistance, or fear,